Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our weekly Hebrew word study. I just pray that this lesson today will be a blessing to you. It may be a little eye-opening to a few things. So we'll jump right into this. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we finished last week um, with verse 8 and verse 9, but I think it's helpful to take a look at verse 9 again, as it helps us segue into verse 10 and 11, which is what we're going to focus on today. As you know, David had defeated Goliath. He was coming back into town, and all of the townspeople were celebrating and giving God the glory for David's accomplishments, and giving more praise and accolades to David than they were to King Saul. King Saul started getting a little jealous, and that's how we get to verse 9 here, where we look at what this jealousy is doing to him. We know that the kingdom is being taken from him and will soon be, well, will be given to David. I won't say soon because it takes quite some time here. But when we get to verse 9, as you see on the screen, it says Vayechis Shaul, and then it has two words. One is avon, and the other one is oyen, and one is in parentheses, and the other is in brackets. And the brackets is what was written, but the parentheses is what's understood. Because if we were to look at this word, it's translated as Saul eyed David. Now, that word eyed can mean different things to different people and in different time frames. So we're just going to open that word up here a little bit, and we see it goes back to the word that was there in the brackets of avon. And avon has the connotation of guilt, of punishment, of just a bad spirit, of something about this situation, that there is a contrariness going on. And so when you read that word that Saul eyed David, sometimes people use the term, he gave him the evil eye. He keeps his eyes upon him because he's looking for him to perform something wrong. You see what's setting up here is that Saul is suspicious, that Saul is now, instead of embracing David and embracing what God is doing, he's counting David as an ally and as a support. He's looking at David as almost like an enemy. And this becomes very, very apparent. And again, we don't know how much time passed from the slaying of Goliath and the entry. There were some other battle portions that were fought in here. So we really don't know the time frame. We just know the thought pattern. And of course, what's important here is to just understand what God is doing and how the key players are handling it. And Saul is not handling it very well at all. So we get to verse 10, and a very challenging verse here. What I want to do, obviously you're seeing it in the Hebrew, but I want to show you the different translations. And in Bible Hub, you have the ability to look at parallel verses. And so we're going to start by looking at the English translation from the Jewish Publication Society, or JPS, of the Tanakh, which is their how they describe the Hebrew Bible, and it was translated in 1917. And it says, it came to pass on the morrow that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house. Okay, we get down to the literal standard version. It says a spirit of sadness from God prospers over Saul, and he prophesies. New American Bible says an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raged. Very different translations. Very different translations. And here, Contemporary English Version, that the Lord let an evil spirit take control of Saul, and he began acting like a crazy man. The Aramaic Bible says that the evil spirit of God was opened up on Saul, and he prophesied. We get to the King James Version here, and it says that a distressing spirit. This is in the New King James. A distressing spirit from God came upon Saul and he prophesied. Well, the original King James said that an evil spirit from God came upon Saul and he prophesied. Um, as you read this, and I guess if we look at the King James Version, it's very challenging to think that God would send an evil spirit. Now, obviously, God can do anything he wants to, and that there are things that happen in the Bible that we do not understand. We do not have perfect understanding of how things happen. We do know that there are times we get an insight, as in the book of Job, when things like this occur. The book of Job is kind of our go-to book because it gives us a insight into a spiritual realm of where things like this might take place, of who does what, and who's controlling what, and who's permitted to do what, and what limits are upon them. And of course, in the case of Job, we have clarity that God just kind of withdrew his protection a little bit, and Satan was allowed to afflict him. And so this is challenging for us, and I think it's key in trying to understand what really happened here. Did God send an evil spirit? What kind of spirit was this? I think where we gain some knowledge is going back to verse 9, and we see that Saul is troubled here in verse 9. Saul is suspicious. And we've all been in positions like this where we have had spirits of, or attitudes, I'll say, of suspicion that have led us in many terrible sleepless nights and fears and worries over things that we thought might happen. And this is where I think this is a proper attitude and understanding to know that Saul was headed down that pathway, that he was opening himself up to things that allowed him to be suspicious. And so when we look at the verbiage here, Vayachi mim machat ra, that was the next day, but then this next word of vatislach, if we open that up, it says that it's to rush in. Salak, it kind of comes from the word to be sent, has a little bit of reference there to send, to go, but this is specifically saying to rush in. And so there's something rushing. What's interesting is that it's kind of connected to the word spirit, which is ruach. And the word ruach in the Bible, there is not a different word for wind versus spirit. It's the same word. It's only the translator's interpretation of it that makes them put wind or spirit, which is a fascinating study in itself. So here we have a wind or a spirit that's rushing in. Kind of have other places where we've heard similar terminology being used, but it doesn't say here that the spirit is from God. It's Ruach Elohim. It's somewhat implied, but the word the mem preposition, which is normally used as from, is not here. There are sometimes sentences that can be called being in construct, which would mean that it uses the implication as something comes from something else or something is of something else. I don't know that I would look at this, or that others would look at this as being a sentence in construct. And so the term from is not in this verse. So we have and spirit, or that's and spirit, rushing spirit, and a rushing spirit, and it just has the word Elohim, God. Then the next word for what kind of spirit this is ra'ah, which is the main word used in the Bible for things that are evil. But it also can mean, it's also linked very closely to other ra'ah words, such as shepherd, such as someone who is a friend. And how you link that together is the amount of passion, the amount of dedication that's in that. It's like the word addiction. You can be addicted to drugs, or you can be addicted to good deeds. It's all where the passion is given to. And so we look at this spirit. It's associated with God. It doesn't say it's from God. Obviously, God made everything. So every spirit that's upon the earth, everything that's created has come from God. It's possible that they are giving an attribute there that this was not a spirit from man, but it was something that comes from a realm that they couldn't explain. So they attribute it to God. And it said it came upon Saul. And then this next word here is kind of interesting. It's Vayit Nabe, and it comes from the word of Navi, which is the word typically used for prophet throughout the Bible. And so here it has the preposition or the conjunction of the vav, and that he prophesied, and that he did something under the influence of this spirit. Well, you see that some translations of the Bible, as we looked at, would say that he prophesied. Others that would say he spoke like a crazy man, that he acted in irrational ways. And again, we have to look that the verbiage and the language, the amount of words that were available to these during this time, the vocabulary is very limited. So if you think of when a prophet would prophesy, he would be saying things that would be challenging to understand. He'd be speaking in terms that people wouldn't relate to. And before we look at this as being, just a strange, way out there occurrence, whatever happened to Saul here, this attitude, spirit, if you will, that he had was distressing him, was causing him to lose his faith, to turn away from God. He was letting his own inhibitions, his own prejudices, his own fears get the best of him. And when people are fearful, when people are under pressure, when people feel that they're losing control of things, they will speak irrationally. They will behave in ways that are not how they would behave if they were in full control and in a relaxed and confident situation. And so this is what's happening to Saul. He's self-destructing. He is going into himself. He is not seeking after God, and it's something that we know is causing his demise because he's not seeking after God. And so we see this happening here. So it helps to unpack the words and learn what's happening, not that we get the wrong understanding of what God might be doing here, as some of the translations attribute that. Did he permit it? Yes. Did he send it, as some of them would indicate? I don't think the Hebrew is clear on that. I think there's enough room for some doubt there that this spirit that is in Saul and acting up in Saul is really part of Saul's nature, really part of how he was ultimately created by God, yes, but a spirit inside of him that had been previously kept under control by his relationship with God, that now his relationship with God was failing and was weakening, and this spirit inside of him of his own natural man was rising up and raging up within him. I think this is very similar to when we look at Pharaoh and Egypt, and where it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And we've talked about that in the past, that God really just strengthened what Pharaoh had wanted to do all the time, that Pharaoh never wanted to let the Israelites go, but he weakened under the pressure of the circumstances. And God says, well, that's not really a change of heart. And so he strengthened Pharaoh's heart in what Pharaoh really decided that he wanted to do ultimately. And I believe this is, for me, a good way to look at this verse and get a good understanding. Well, of course, it changed the whole relationship between David and Saul. David had always come in to play the harp for Saul because Saul had a kind of a depressing attitude previously, and it made him feel better. It wasn't quite working as well anymore. And actually, when he's coming into play, for Saul, it says that Saul had a spear in his hand. This must have been a very high pressure performance here. It'd be like sitting before, a military leader of a country who's got a machine gun in his hand, and you hit one wrong note, and the bullets might come flying your way. And we see that verse 11, that Saul actually cast the spear at David with the intent of, it says, pin him to the wall, where the word okay really comes from the word of nakah, which is to smite. So he wasn't just trying to, throw it through the folds of his tunic or shirt and pin him to the wall. He wanted to pierce him and smite him and kill him. And it said, but David escaped, and 2 times he escaped from Saul's presence. So obviously he was not going to continue in his musical career. And we're going to find out next week in verse 12 where his reassignment came in. So I hope you are encouraged and know that God's word has just a beautiful way to search it and study it, and that God has given us that ability through all the tools that he's made possible for us. And I pray it's a blessing to you. So God bless you. Hope you just have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your week, and talk to you again later. Bye-bye.